She came at me like she owned the place. Clipboard in one hand, a heavy ring of master keys in the other, I strut down my gravel drive as though it were her stage. The new HOA president, Diane Miller, wasn't the type to knock or ask, she announced. "Annual inspection," she barked, thrusting a stack of papers toward me, as if the ink on the page had the power to erase my private property signs. Her face was tight, every wrinkle sharpened by certainty, like she had already rehearsed this moment in her bathroom mirror. And there I stood, garden gloves still on, hands dirty from pruning my fence line, wondering how far she was prepared to go. Most people, when confronted with someone carrying an air of authority, shrink back. They second-guess themselves. Maybe I don't understand the rules. Maybe she really can walk in. That's the weapon HOA presidents like Diane wield. It isn't the keys, it's the confidence. But here's the thing. Confidence built on nothing is just theater, and theater crumbles the second you shine a light on it. So instead of stepping aside, I leaned on the gate, calm, steady, and hit record on my phone. If she wanted a stage, then fine. I'd give her an audience too. "Open this gate," she snapped, rattling her keys as though she could intimidate the lock into obedience. She kept repeating the phrase mandatory access like a broken record, trying to hypnotize me into compliance. But every time she said it, I couldn't help but ask myself, and I wanted her to hear it in my voice, mandatory for who? You or the law? The truth was simple. My deed said one thing, her clipboard said another. Which one carries weight in the real world? The longer she stood there, the redder her face grew, frustration bubbling over into frantic energy. Yet the more unhinged she looked, the calmer I became. That contrast is powerful. People expect panic to meet panic. But when you hold your ground, when you meet their storm with steady silence, it forces them to reveal themselves. And reveal she did. She jammed those useless keys into my lockbox, scraping paint off the gate, muttering about protocols and insurance. But each twist of metal that didn't fit was proof of her bluff unraveling. And here's where I want you to pause. Imagine being in my shoes. Imagine someone so sure of their power that they walk straight into your space, convinced you'll fold. Would you? Or would you, like me, stand tall, knowing that the louder they get, the closer they are to exposing their own weakness? She lost the polite patience she wore like a coat she could remove when it no longer fit. Diane's voice sharpened from cordial to clipped to plainly threatening in the space of a sentence. "Fines," she said, as though naming penalties aloud would bend reality. "Legal action," she added, as if the mere threat of jargon compels obedience. "Mandatory access." Each term was delivered with the cadence of someone practicing authority, not someone presenting proof. It was the classic escalation tactic. Use confident language to make people doubt their own understanding of the rules and hope they concede before asking for evidence. Intimidation is often theatrical. People forget that loudness and spectacle can resemble authority even when they lack substance. So I did what any sensible person should do when confronted with a performance of force. I documented it. I filmed the exchange slowly and deliberately, phone steady in my hand, because a camera turns assertions into records. Documentation is not about shaming. It is about preserving facts so they can be examined later by impartial eyes. When you change the frame from a whispered claim to recorded action, the balance shifts toward truth. The crew was more than props. They were active participants in the attempt to manufacture urgency. One man leaned on the gate and said in a low voice, "You wouldn't want your property to be a hazard, would you?" That line is clever because it wraps a moral demand in community language. But authority that rests on rhetoric collapses when asked to show its paper trail. So I asked plainly, "Where is the notice? Where is the recorded easement? Show me the citation." Silence followed. People who actually act under legal authority produce records without hesitation. Those who bluff try to change the subject. Diane tried another angle. She spoke of insurance non-compliance and membership penalties, painting scenarios where committees and carriers would punish me. Threats are effective when the listener believes there is no recourse to check them. But words alone are fragile. When she could not produce a single verifiable document, her pronouncements sounded like bluffing at a poker table. Loud hand, no cards. Threats without evidence are theater pretending to be law, and the theater unravels quickly under scrutiny. As the noise rose, neighbors drifted toward the edge of the yard, phones in hand. Intimidation depends on isolation. Once witnesses arrive, the script loses its potency. I noticed the crew exchange looks, suddenly aware their actions were being recorded and might be used in a complaint or report. That hesitation is telling. People who depend on crowding someone out rarely persist when the crowd turns into an audience with cameras and questions. The dynamic pivoted. The attempt to bully became an invitation to document wrongdoing. The lesson is simple and uncomfortable. Pressure often feels like power until it is exposed to light. Your best defense isn't aggression. It is preparation, calmness, and a willingness to document. Stand your ground without hostility. Ask for proof, invite witnesses, and carry the basics: a deed, a recent survey, contact numbers for county code, and your insurer. Bring essential documentation: deed, recent property survey, recorded notices, and keep county and insurance contacts handy. Call for code enforcement when escalation begins. If you stay steady, you turn their spectacle into a legal question instead of a moral dilemma. That difference changes outcomes fast and resilience. The cruiser's lights blinked at the end of the lane like punctuation. When Officer Martinez and Officer Johnson stepped out, their presence rewrote the energy in the yard. Diane barreled forward with a stack of notices and that heavy ring of keys swinging like a claim. "He's blocking mandatory emergency access," she insisted, voice sharp, eyes hard with certainty. The officers did the work they're trained to do. Listen first, ask questions second. I held out my deed, the posted private property sign, and the time-stamped footage from my camera, and I let the facts speak. When Officer Martinez requested Diane present the recorded easement or county filing she claimed to rely on, her practiced confidence faltered. She shuffled papers and produced HOA letters, notes, memos, meeting minutes, but nothing filed with the county. That distinction matters more than people realize. A board can vote and a president can admonish, but only recorded legal instruments change property rights. I watched as a simple procedural question: is there a recorded easement? Did what loud rhetoric could not. It forced the conversation back to documentation. Officer Johnson made a call to dispatch to confirm property boundaries and recorded instruments. Hearing the dispatch operator confirm the county records, I felt the shift. The two officers exchanged a look that stripped the moment of its theater. When public records contradict performance, authority leans toward the documented fact. The officers explained with professional clarity rather than judgment that HOA boards are empowered to regulate community rules but cannot compel access to private parcels absent a recorded easement or an emergency. Their language was precise and quiet, and that precision eroded Diane's posture. The warning they issued was straightforward. Continued attempts to enter or tamper with private security could result in trespass citations or further action. It was not a dramatic arrest. It was the kind of legal boundary that removes an abusive script from the stage. Diane's chest tightened. The certainty that had propelled her into my yard now looked less like conviction and more like vulnerability. Authority had been unmasked as performance. Neighbors who had drifted to the fence line watched as their phones became instruments of accountability instead of gossip. The presence of witnesses changes the calculus of intimidation. A tactic that relies on isolation is neutralized when neighbors record and testify. Diane tried to restate the moral urgency of community safety. Still, without a recorded easement or clear legal mandate, her words were thin. That contrast between rhetoric and record is where most of this kind of conflict ends. Still, the officers left room for reality. A true emergency could justify forced entry by law enforcement or fire services. That small, sober caveat kept the situation honest and left an open loop. Our victory was real but contingent. Diane's departing promise, "This is not over," was less a legal threat than a signal that someone humiliated might regroup. It guaranteed future scenes, and by doing so, it compelled me to prepare rather than relax. The practical lesson is simple and powerful. Calm, evidence, and witnesses change the outcome when authority is performed rather than proved. The police sided with procedure, not personality, and that tilt turns spectacle into a legal question. For anyone watching, take that clarity as permission. Document, show your deed, invite witnesses, and call the proper agencies. Protecting your rights often begins with preparation, and preparation honors truth over theatrics. Stay steady, keep records handy, and remember, courage combined with facts, witnesses, and process wins in the long run. I woke before sunrise to the metallic rattle of a spray paint can and the faint scrape of measuring tape on brick. 3 men moved across my yard with purpose, carrying cans, stencils, and the practiced hush of people who believe they can alter a scene without consequence. They painted enormous red letters across my driveway, "Fire Lane." After stenciling, they crossed my survey stakes. They began relocating patio chairs and planters, arranging a makeshift corridor where my private property once stood. When something like this happens, your first instinct is to believe it's a mistake, an errant contractor, a scheduling mishap, or simple human error, but patterns reveal intention. The crew arrived at dawn, worked with methodical efficiency for nearly an hour, and left with the calm of people who expected no questions. I recognized the jacket of one worker from the earlier HOA encounter. Repetition of faces and tools argued for coordination rather than accident. What began as irritation moved into deliberate escalation designed to engineer compliance. Why would an HOA escalate from warnings into physically reconfiguring a homeowner's yard? Sometimes panic about liability breeds rash choices. Boards fearful of losing insurance approvals may act without counsel. Other times, the calculus is more calculated. Create an apparent violation, document it, then point to that documentation to justify penalties or forced access. In the worst scenarios, people manufacture facts on the ground to create leverage where none existed. Understanding motive shifts your response from reactive anger to strategic countermeasures. Neighbors soon appeared at windows and doorways, phones raised because isolation is the instrument of intimidation. Once witnesses arrive, the script changes. My neighbor Emma stood on her porch, recording and narrating timestamps as she confirmed that the painted line crossed my survey markers. The crew's confident rhythm faltered when they realized cameras and neighbors were watching. Their presence converted private aggression into public evidence. A tactic that depends on solitude is much less effective when a neighborhood becomes a chorus of witnesses. I contacted the non-emergency police line and county code enforcement, guiding Emma through the footage to help her corroborate times and measurements for officials. Officers and inspectors arrived, photographed the paint, measured it against recorded plats, and took sworn statements. What had been an aggressive attempt to redefine my property line became an official incident file. That administrative record removes plausible deniability and creates leverage for insurance companies, counsel, and potential civil claims. The psychological pivot is straightforward. Refuse to let spectacle define the narrative. Vandalism and manufactured facts thrive on emotional shock. Your defense is methodical poise. Document everything, summon witnesses, contact the relevant agencies, and preserve the evidence. Converting outrage into a chain of records neutralizes theatrics. It forces the conflict into the domain of law and procedure, where facts, not bluster, determine outcomes. Spray paint can feel permanent in the moment, but permanence bends to persistence. In the days that followed, photographs, neighbor statements, inspector reports, and timestamps were assembled into a coherent case. The HOA's attempt to redraw my property with loud letters failed because paperwork, witnesses, and persistence are more durable than bravado. At home, I cataloged everything. Multiple-angle video from my porch camera, high-resolution photos of the painted letters, a measuring tape comparison against my recorded survey stakes, and notes about the workers' clothing and tools. Then I created a timeline, time, action, witness, and evidence, and sent a copy to my insurer, county code office, and an attorney for review. Those immediate steps might sound technical, but they turn an emotional violation into a transparent chain of proof. When people see organized records, they see a claim that must be addressed, not shrugged off. After the spray paint incident, I realized this wasn't just a matter of intimidation. It was a test of whether knowledge and persistence could counteract assumed power. I spent hours at the county recorder's office, sifting through dusty ledgers, scanned maps, and recorded easement filings. Each page was a small puzzle piece, a chance to understand the legal boundaries that had been quietly redrawn long before Diane ever showed up. Why was she so confident? What document had convinced her that she could cross private property lines with impunity? Curiosity gnawed at me, not as idle speculation, but as a tool, because in situations like this, understanding motive and proof is the difference between vulnerability and control. The files revealed history that wasn't immediately obvious. Years ago, a fire lane easement had been recorded across my side yard and driveway, granting emergency access to the community. On paper, it explained Diane's earlier insistence. She was operating under the assumption that the easement was still valid. But as I flipped through subsequent records, my pulse quickened. The follow-up documents bore stamps and signatures from the county engineer, fire marshal, and surveyor, clearly stating that the easement had been vacated, relocated, and officially removed from my property. Every word, every seal, every date reinforced a single truth. The HOA's authority was based on outdated information. Their actions weren't backed by current law. They were based on what no longer existed. The discovery hit me in waves. Relief first, because now the harassment wasn't ambiguous. It was clearly illegitimate. Then there was a rising confidence, because this proof shifted the balance of power entirely. Diane's performance, her threats, her spray-painted fire lane, all collapsed under the weight of official documentation. The same tactics that had tried to make me feel small, cornered, or intimidated were suddenly impotent in the face of irrefutable evidence. Holding the recorded easement vacation in my hands, I felt a quiet satisfaction, validation born not from emotion but from persistence, patience, and the willingness to do the work that most people avoid. The psychological shift was immediate. Where previously I had been reactive, caught in the tension of confrontation, I was now proactive, empowered. Knowledge became leverage, and leverage became strategy. I could anticipate Diane's next moves, because every attempt she made would have to contend with documented law. That anticipation turned fear into preparation. It allowed me to plan, document, and invite witnesses ahead of her subsequent escalation. This isn't just a story of a property dispute. It's an example of what happens when someone turns research and diligence into protection. For viewers, the lesson is subtle but profound. When authority is performed rather than verified, the quiet work of verification wins. Hours of combing through public records, mapping survey lines, and cross-referencing documents may seem tedious. Still, those actions create clarity where chaos has been manufactured. By the time Diane realized the easement had been vacated years ago, the narrative had already shifted. What had begun as a tense confrontation transformed into an opportunity for empowerment. A turning point where preparation and knowledge turned the tide and set the stage for the final confrontation that would leave no room for dispute. The morning air was crisp, carrying a tension I had come to recognize. The approach of Diane and her crew was unmistakable, the clatter of boots and jingle of keys announcing their arrival long before I saw them. They believed this was the culmination, the final act where authority would bend reality to their script. Diane strode up with the confidence of someone certain the law and neighborhood courtesy were on her side. "Final inspection," she barked, waving papers as though the stack alone could compel me to open the gate. I didn't flinch. I knew better. I had done the work most people avoid, contacted county code enforcement, organized evidence, and prepared for this exact moment. As she jabbed her keys toward the lockbox, the timing couldn't have been more precise. Code enforcement arrived almost immediately, officers stepping out of marked vehicles with clipboards and a calm authority that instantly reframed the encounter. Diane's bravado faltered, replaced by the rapid recalibration of someone realizing that performance no longer dictates consequence. The difference between perceived authority and actual legal power became stark in those first seconds. This was the line between intimidation and accountability, and for Diane, it was one she had crossed without realizing it. I handed over the documents I had painstakingly collected, recorded county easement vacation filings, survey maps, and timestamps from the spray paint incident. Each piece was meticulously organized, a narrative in itself, proving that the fire lane easement she had cited no longer existed and that my property remained private and protected. The officers examined everything, their expressions neutral but decisive. Then came the quiet but undeniable declaration. The HOA president's claims were invalid, her actions constituted trespassing, and she had knowingly overstepped legal boundaries. Every key, every mandatory access declaration, every attempt to manipulate the situation collapsed under the weight of concrete evidence. Diane tried to argue, to justify her actions, to invoke community safety, insurance compliance, and historical precedent, but the officials were methodical and unyielding. Knowledge, preparation, and patience had shifted the power entirely. The crew around her began to shrink into the background, uncertain and exposed, as the documentation turned the intimidation tactic into a public and legal reckoning. Neighbors who had gathered to witness the escalation now observed the transformation of tension into accountability. Where once there had been fear and uncertainty, there was clarity. Trespass and disregard for legal authority have consequences. Citations were issued in real time. Diane's face went pale, the certainty that had propelled her across my property now undone by process and proof. She could not argue against documents stamped and signed by county engineers, fire marshals, and legal authorities. The officers detailed the violations: unauthorized entry onto private property, interference with personal security measures, and actions that violated county code. Each word, each line punctuated a moment she could neither spin nor resist. Authority founded on ignorance and assumption crumbled instantly when exposed to scrutiny. Watching the scene unfold, I felt a profound shift, not vindictiveness, but relief and empowerment. The culmination of careful research, meticulous documentation, and strategic patience had produced justice. The very tools Diane wielded to intimidate were now meaningless, rendered ineffective by the weight of truth. This was the dramatic payoff every viewer craves, the point where tension resolves and fairness prevails. It also served as a reminder: standing firm with knowledge and preparation transforms confrontation into triumph, fear into strategy, and harassment into opportunity for clarity. And yet, even as Diane gathered her remaining composure, the warning was clear. Authority must always be verified, not assumed, and when it is challenged with evidence, performance alone cannot hold power. For anyone watching, the lesson resonates beyond this yard, beyond this dispute. Persistence, preparation, and documentation are the ultimate equalizers when faced with unwarranted authority. True power lies not in keys or titles, but in facts, records, and the courage to enforce them calmly and decisively. The week following the confrontation unfolded in a cascade of accountability that the HOA president could not have anticipated. An emergency board meeting was called, with tension thick in the conference room as emails pinged and phones buzzed. Members scrambled to understand the legal exposure. Insurance representatives withdrew support, citing the HOA's invalid claims regarding emergency access and the improperly asserted easement. The documents I had gathered, previously my shield, now functioned as evidence that reshaped the narrative for everyone involved. Authority based on assumption, threats, and outdated documents had evaporated in the light of verifiable facts. As the board convened, Diane's confidence faltered in plain view. Legal counsel outlined potential personal liability, fines, and civil exposure, leaving no room for spin or improvisation. Witness accounts, timestamps, photographs, and official filings stacked like weights against her, illustrating how public accountability can dismantle an inflated sense of power. Members exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that unchecked assertion without evidence can translate into reputational and financial risk. The tension that had hovered over my property transformed into a cautionary tale for the room. Authority is conditional, enforceable only within boundaries defined by law. I reflected on the arc of these events, from initial intimidation to official citations, to the ultimate withdrawal of support from insurers who could no longer justify compliance with unlawful claims. Each moment reinforced a truth too often forgotten. Rights are preserved not by fear of confrontation, but by the deliberate exercise of knowledge and preparation. Standing firm, documenting carefully, and understanding legal boundaries turned what could have been a prolonged conflict into a decisive resolution. That transformation is not just about one property dispute. It demonstrates a universal principle. Measured persistence and evidence-based action neutralize even the most aggressive challenges to personal autonomy. Watching the board wrestle with the fallout, I recognized the psychological power of verification over performance. Diane's authority, once unquestioned in her own mind, unraveled when subjected to scrutiny. Titles, keys, and loud proclamations proved irrelevant against the certainties of law, recorded easements, and corroborated witness testimony. Viewers might see this as a victory in a single dispute. Still, the broader lesson is empowering. Systems that seem overwhelming, threatening, or rigid can be held accountable when approached methodically and courageously. Closure, in this case, was both public and instructive. The president faced formal removal, was required to issue apologies, and was compelled to undergo corrective actions for the misrepresentation of authority. My property was returned to its rightful state, free from unauthorized markings or interference, and a clear precedent was established for how factual documentation governs outcomes. For anyone watching, the takeaway is profound. You do not need to yield to overreach or intimidation. Knowledge, preparation, and strategic patience create real leverage. When you combine these elements, injustice can be challenged, authority can be clarified, and personal rights can be defended confidently and effectively. Her master keys unlocked nothing but chaos, and yet one stamped document shut it all down. It's a strange kind of victory. Quiet, procedural, yet profoundly satisfying. Standing firm, knowing your rights, and documenting every step can transform fear into control and intimidation into powerless theatrics. You realize that authority without legitimacy is nothing more than noise, and evidence is the true power that enforces boundaries. To everyone watching, remember this: you do not have to yield to bluster or false claims. Preparation, persistence, and clarity are your shields. Facing intimidation is daunting, but the payoff is freedom, control, and the knowledge that you can protect what is yours. And when you think this HOA saga has ended, another story waits in the shadows, filled with even more outrageous claims and confrontations. Stay tuned, because what comes next will challenge assumptions, test patience, and prove once again that facts, not fear, rule.